Welcome to Community Service Announcement. If you're a first-time visitor, if you've been checking out some of our past podcast discussions, we really appreciate you being and following. I'm hoping you're enjoying that journey. So if you meet me for the first time, my name's Alex Mechanical and
Ivan Teese.
And we are your host, and we're going to be taking you on a journey with different conversations. For those who have missed out, we've been talking about youth, crime, and the community, and also discussing the importance of role models when we're talking about young people. Today, we've brought in somebody within the youth work industry, which I'm going to introduce to you, David Bigglestone. Big yourself up, David. Now, David, a quick story right here. I've met David when he was a young person in his school. I worked in his school in Newham many years ago, and he was just on his way out. But we built up we built up a great rapport with each other, and I can see from then that David was a real engaged young person. That not only was he good at talking and getting on with the young people around him, but also he was really good with the teachers. It was one that the teachers really liked, and he felt comfortable being able to engage with adults. So actually, when I then kind of bumped into him many years later through my manager at the time, it wasn't a surprise to me that David would be involved in the youth work industry, simply because he had that sort of the quality, the nature to really connect and bring people together. He was really confident in himself, but at the same time was a very positive energy to be around. So it is more than my pleasure to have David Bigglestone, the youth worker, up in the building. Let's make some noise. I know you're making noise at home.
Love it.
Thank you, Alex. And Ivan, for letting me on.
Great to have you.
Most definitely. And I think, before we kind of get into some of the questions, if you can in a couple of minutes, let us know, what was your story? How did you make the transition from schoolboy to being someone that's so established in youth work?
The long story short, I think I was quite a precocious 11-year-old and looking for something to do. So I ended up at my local youth centre. And what's all this about? And activities for young people and being involved in kind of like a school council, except it was wider. It was the youth council kind of across the borough. So I kind of fell into it and I really enjoyed it. And it was something interesting and unusual that I didn't have access to before. And as time went on and I tried to be more helpful to the youth workers and people around me, I kind of fell into it. I don't think I know how to do anything else. And it's quite interesting because in youth work, especially now that I'm, doing it full time, you never quite know what the day will bring. You never know what young person is going to walk in the door and make you laugh, make you cry, make you have to do a million administrative things. So, 1 minute you could be painting a wall. Like, it's just so random. And I think part of the reason I kind of do it is I was a product of good youth work. I was someone that other adults and youth workers around me invested time in me and gave me a whole host of experiences and new horizons, for want of a better phrase, that if I can give just a small amount back, then I've won. I don't know how I would quantify it, but yeah, I can only but keep trying to, replicate and hopefully best some of the stuff that the youth workers gave to me.
Amazing. It's funny because, I didn't really, as a young person, there was a youth club near us, but I didn't go consistently. It's only for a short stint in my childhood did I go to a youth club. But Ivan, you went to youth club, right?
Yeah, I went to a local youth club at the end of my road, and similar to you, Alex, it was always on my doorstep, and I always seen it. And then I don't know what happened, but something in the community happened, and I ended up there. And and I think similar to what you were saying, David, like. I didn't take a career in youth work, but it did a lot for me. Some of my fondest memories actually happened in that youth centre. So
amazing. And so, back to you, David. From your perspective, why would you say youth work has a potential for making like a positive impact on young people?
It has a positive impact, no doubt. But how that's monitored and measured to people upstairs that fund that work is very difficult to see. But I think we have to start from a different place of looking at what the relationship is built on. So whereas people are familiar with having a teacher in their life, no one gets to decide that history or that English teacher that they're going to end up with, right? Social workers have an interesting reputation because they're known for taking kids away from parents, right? In the kind of short answer. youth workers, we're kind of seen as like professional table tennis and pool players. So I think we kind of have to unpick those relationships, because in the youth work world, it's voluntary. No one is forcing a young person to walk through that door. Yeah, their parents might have encouraged them to go, but they're still making an active choice to walk in that door. And I think that that unique part of the relationship where you're not being forced to be in it gives a different vibe. And it allows us to explore stuff. We're not working with them to complete their English work or to look in depth in terms of social care and those kind of needs. We're meeting them where they're at and what's going on for them. And often that kind of relationship allows for more free-flowing conversations where actually they can talk to a trusted adult, or hopefully they feel that we're trusted. They can speak with an adult about all sorts of things where our only motive and motivation to do the work is to find out about them and what's going on for them. So, in the space of one youth work session, I can be talking about self-harm with a young person. Another one, I could be wandering in talking about doing their Duke of Edinburgh's award. Another kid might be talking to me about being bullied at school and their teachers not taking it seriously. And that's all happening in the space of, half an hour. And sometimes it's not about us as youth workers having those answers, but it's about fostering the environment where these discussions can take place. And some of the most interesting conversations happen when you least expect them or when you least plan it. And I think, again, kind of explaining the youth work industry, the way we look at it is informal education. It's unstructured learning. It's learning on the go. So, I'll give you a really good one. There's something called the Jack Petches Award. So this is a rich guy that made a lot of money in East London and decided to give it back. And the young people get to decide often how that money's spent. So it was a 17-year-old that won the money. And I said, what do you want to do with it? He said he wants to go out for a meal. Okay, cool. Where do you want to go? A lot of in and are. Anyways, to central London we go.
I don't know that.
On the way there somewhere in Covent Garden, I can't remember the name of it now, but somewhere in central London. And so we on the way to the restaurant in the minibus, him and a number of the other young people that he selected to come are starting to say to me, they've never been this far. And I'm thinking to myself, you're 17 and you've never come as far as Limehouse Link and a bit more and starting to reach Tower Bridge. Anyway, as we've had the meal and stuff, and they're just amazed. They've never been to central London in their lives. So on the way back, very deliberately, I ended up being like a tour guide and driving around the Houses of Parliament and past MI5 and, kind of Westminster Abbey and through Soho and Buckingham Palace. And that trip should have been to have a meal and come back. It ended up being a couple of extra hours more, but we all learned loads. And I learned loads about what they didn't know about. And also, I'm kind of amazed that I remembered some of the stuff I did. But it's interesting that sometimes we think our experience is shared by those around us. And until we check in with each other, we don't really know. So in terms of going back to your original question about the positive impact we can have, it's that building of relationship, working out what we can do to help the young people with where their needs are at, hopefully via their wants and things they're interested in. And then it's that nice harmonious kind of rounded bubble, taking young people on residential. I've took kids that are 16, 17 years old on their Duke of Edinburgh stuff where they've got a camp for the night. And for some of them, it's the first time they've ever made a meal for themselves. I've had some really lovely opportunities to spend some time with young people, watching them in their firsts. And one of the best ones is the first aeroplane ride. So I've been really lucky to do some international youth exchanges. Yes. I've learned now to film them because we live in the era with our phones. And it's just magical and a part of me feels really bad that their parents aren't with them to witness that. But hence why I video it and then send it to them on WhatsApp when we arrive in said country. So I'm really lucky because I get to see that wonder in young eyes that not all of us do, especially when we become jaded adults. So it's a really rewarding job for all.
You said a few things that's just reminded me of when I was working in a school, and obviously I was working at the school that you was at, David, as well as Ivan. I don't know, Ivan, like for you, would you say you was a traveller? Because I mean, you're originally from up north anyway. Was you traveling around that much at that point? I know we'd done a lot of trips with me.
So one of the ones I have to tell you about is, and similar, it sparked a memory when you said it. I'm super claustrophobic to the point where I can't lock a toilet door.
Yeah.
We went on a trip across London, far as you can go, basically. And we get to the train station and I'm standing there, white, pale-faced, looking at this train like, Alex, I can't get on it. Alex is looking at me, looking at the time. It's nighttime outside already. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, Alex, I can't get on it. So next thing you know, we're on all manner of overhead trains going across London from Waterloo. And then Alex walks up to my door, opens the door. My mum's standing there, sort of thing. And he's like, I explained, obviously, but Alex walked me to the house as well, which was fantastic. But yeah, that was the earliest one I remember. And Alex took the time and didn't judge me for it, but took me on the longest route. So yeah, that's time you'll never get back, Alex, but I much appreciate it. Similar to what you were saying, David, about, you for the day, you were like a tour guide, going past Buckingham Palace, like there's the Queen, that's where she has tea. It's similar.
Yeah, we basically had to avoid getting in a tunnel, so we had to basically take a route of trains that just basically going to stay at the tunnel so we can come around and come. I mean, it was mad. But no, you're very right. And also, you mentioned, David, about take planes. There was one particular year group where we took some kids to Greece. They won as part of the Olympic competition. I had the privilege of going on a trip with them and taking them through Heathrow Airport and just seeing their faces.
Wow.
For many of them, it was the first time getting on a plane, the whole reaction. Some of them was nervous, even though in school they're so like boisterous or whatever. It was beautiful to see them, and even just talking amongst themselves, trying to reassure themselves that this is going to be a cool experience. It was great. So I second what you're saying there about the description of youth work.
But also what you said before, you just said some really cool things that even just now, me thinking about my child and some of the kids in my family, just the way that you painted that picture so well of being that person who's where kids are, and the idea that they can go there without a kind of schedule of some kind or some sort of, a scripted meeting, like you have to speak to this person and you have to open up and you have to share. But it's the idea that you said, there's times where they come in and they've got things they're struggling with, and you're helping them with, that's not scripted, it's completely unscripted, but they also then might in those moments say things to you that they might not say to everyone else. And just, hearing that is just, I just feel like it's something that I'm missing myself, let alone kids these days, just someone to talk to. So I just thought that was just an incredible thing you did there, and just say, what an awesome guy you are to do that for people.
Yeah, I mean, Ivan, and as you're saying that, what that's triggering for me, I mean, David, would you say it's fair to say then that maybe as a youth worker, one of the skills that youth workers use is you're using the organic flow to do calculated things with intention. So as you said, rather than just taking the kids home, you recognize there was a need. Oh, these kids don't actually know this area. So you went with the flow, you took them around, but in your back of your mind, your intention was to give them an experience.
It's interesting because I think youth work's unique in the sense that you can study it as academia, but it comes down to a lot of social sciences and building those relationships. But what I think we're always searching for in youth work is the need. What are the needs in general of the young people in front of you? And that will change depending on the community you're in. So for instance, when something as tragic as George Floyd being killed, obviously that event went round the world, but it's then what we do with it inside of the youth club when, at the moment it's the Ukraine war. So it's unpicking all of that and using those moments as a teaching point, you might like to say. But at the same time, I don't think we have one set message. In youth work, it's about asking questions. So when they say, I think World War III is coming, I say, why do you think that? And again, it's the conversation that stems from that. It's not about giving an answer, yes or no. And I can maybe say why that isn't a great idea later on, because I think we want people to ask questions, to be critical of the situations they're in and what's going on around them, and for them to make their own choices in life. So I think in youth work, one of the things we constantly do, some people might call it constant evaluation or like critical analysis, is more brutal than that. It's, are we doing a good job? What are we actually trying to achieve here? And it's constantly asking that question. And I think a lot of other professions can get really entrenched with, we do a great job because we do this, end of story. Whereas, we're not like that as humans. We don't operate on a default function. We have ups and downs. We're emotional creatures. So I think it's really important. One of the words we often use in youth work is reflection.
Yes.
So, and especially with new youth workers coming through, it's trying to get them to, the question I ask is there been a situation or something that's occurred recently where you thought to yourself, I didn't like the way I did that, and I'm going to do X differently next time, and unpicking those threads, because it's really important that none of us become complacent. Like, you guys have been really complimentary about you, bless you, but I'm sure if you saw me sometimes in the youth centre or at work with young people, you might question it. But because sometimes you've got to tell people home truths. You may be that trusted adult that they're talking to, but you sometimes have to deliver the truth, which sometimes people will, the truth as I might see it in that moment, or what I think they might benefit from hearing. So I think, there's something unique in this, like, if you do it well in youth work, being constantly critical of what you do. And it's not about, how do we strive for one better? It's checking that what we're intending to do is meeting the needs of the young people that's in front of us now. It's no good keeping what happened 5 years ago in mind. Like, for instance, I mentioned George Floyd earlier. How we talk about race, ethnicity, and even those words and terms has changed big time.
And I definitely would like to dig a little bit more deeper with that one. So definitely hold that thought right there. You've said quite a lot. You mentioned about asking questions as a worker, and I really like that. Something that's quite unique to youth work. Did I do the right thing? Always self-reflecting and recognizing that each situation is going to be different all the time, which is powerful, because that definitely, as a youth worker, keeps you on your toes. You can never get caught up and gassed about just doing the same routine and doing it well, because it's never the same. But what I was going to ask you, with the many, many conversations that you're having, and as you said, with a range of topics that are really wide, is there any particular themes that you think are coming through from these conversations, if you know what I mean, in terms of themes around maybe needs, requirements, or things that are quite telling of the type of people that you're working with?
I think one element, and it's obvious, is mental health. And I don't know whether it's the fact that it's something that we try and promote to talk more openly now, whether it's the royals and all the rest of it, and
Right.
just in general society promoting that.
Okay.
I also think there is, I don't know. I wish I'd gone away and read some scientific academic papers, but that's not what you're asking. You're asking for what I touch on a daily basis. Is interesting in terms of the young people that turn up to the youth centre. They are very diverse, but I'd say for a lot of them, they're looking for something else. They're looking for that conversation. They're not getting that contact with someone else. And I think we find a lot of young people that come to you, and I really don't want to generalize this, but you said themes. So I think one of the things with young people in youth clubs is actually finding friends, and they may be some of the socially awkward ones where, for whatever reason, it's not happening elsewhere. And we watch that happen in the youth club. I see Tom become friends with Maria and all the rest of it, because we can see, like, okay, maybe we can massage this a little bit and get them to, chat to each other, because they're actually sharing similar problems with us, and they probably find some benefit of chatting with each other. I did come across one piece of research recently, I think it's a UN one, that basically charts a huge decline in young people's happiness in the United Kingdom. And that's often attributed to things like exam stress and feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders, and, lack of ambition for the future. And I think one theme I certainly do notice is a lack of ambition. But I could have said the same to you maybe 5 years ago. I think it's harder being younger now, but that's me looking at it and not them. And I think they don't know any differently. And I just can't imagine what it's like now, where your YouTube thing bings to your Instagram, to your, well, they don't use Facebook anymore, but to your Snapchat, to your, everything bings and beeps, and everything is crying for attention. And one trend I definitely notice is, if you ever show any of them anything in YouTube, like on your phone, you're like, have a quick look at that. They tap the screen to see how long the clip is, like, as if 3 minutes of their life is going to be taken away. So I don't know if that's frivolous or not, but I don't know if that's the world. I think it's very difficult for me to, like, disassociate with what's going on in the rest of society, because it's all part of the conversation, if you know what I mean. When people talk about, like, youth violence, and a lot of them are quicker to turn to violence now, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think things might escalate quickly in certain groups of young people, or the fear of, but again, maybe the system education, social services, the youth services, whatever, is not meeting the needs of those families or those young people to assist and help them. And you mentioned role models in your introduction. I mean, that's an interesting one to unpick. But yeah, the lack of ambition or wanting a better tomorrow or realizing you can have a better tomorrow, or even, sometimes, especially working with some of the teenagers, a week is a very long time to them. If you remind them something happened last week, that was ages ago. And you're like, well, the way I look at the world, not quite. But yeah, I think the same issues adults have, I think they share all the similar things. And sometimes they hide them very well. And, they're a lot more emotionally aware and aware of things that maybe their parents and other people in their lives don't think they are.
You mentioned that you said in one particular chart that you read, they said young people's happiness is declining. Is there any external changes that you think might attribute to that? And again, this is just an opinion because we don't have any scientific official facts for it.
I think based on when you said about the ambition thing, because I thought that was quite, I could connect to that, because I think even myself as an adult, there's a lot of times where I've got potential to do better. And I think to the technology piece, Alex, that there's a lot to distract me away from, basically, I might have an idea in the shower. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to build this thing. And then I pick up my phone and the next thing you know, I look down and it's dark outside and I'm like, oh my God. You can lose yourself a little bit in the technology. And as we've talked about in other episodes, it's everywhere. Your fridge now, you can bloody go, you can scroll your Facebook thing while you're going to get a drink, well, if you're rich enough. But I feel like that ambition side of it is quite an interesting one, because I do feel like that is as a basic human mechanic. There's so much more you can do when you've got something you're aiming for, right? And you can't miss if you're aiming for something necessarily. And I feel like that for me is such a key component in just people in general, adults, children, etc. And so I feel like that ambition side of it seems something that I've noticed in myself and younger people. And yes. I feel like just being able to be distracted by devices is not helping at all.
Interesting.
David, what do you think?
I was just pondering, it's quite easy to default to the technology excuse, but I think is that human connection. We're built as humans, most of us, to enjoy the company of others. We're social creatures, and the old adage, it's why we sit and watch Netflix now. But the olden version of that is we sit round the campfire and tell stories. And probably we could all do with a bit more of sitting around the campfire and sharing stories and actually connecting with each other. Because maybe that's the bit with technology that I'm kind of erring at, is that lack of human contact, or even things, and obviously COVID, the pandemic and stuff's not helped, but like a handshake, these things that actually as human beings are really important. And, in terms of like the ambition, I think if you've not been told in your life so far that you can have X, Y, and Z, you can have better than what your parents had, or you can achieve those things if you set your mind to it. I think, Ivan, like you said, if you aim for something, don't matter if you don't get to that bit, but you'll hit something, is really relevant. Because I wonder, with schools and all the pressures that are on them, the thing that they're interested in most is getting the kids' exam grades done, right? I'm talking in general. I don't mean on a day-to-day basis with, the English teacher helping out X kid, but there definitely is a thing about league tables, in social work, closing cases and getting things dealt with as fast as possible all saves money in their eyes. Yeah. And again, youth work isn't that special. We have targets we have to meet. But again, it's this weird thing of this voluntary relationship that allows us to the time and space. And it is an absolute pleasure and a reward to be able to spend that time with them. And often in England, people are paid to do that. I mean, it started out, 150 years ago as the churches kind of, something has to be done about the kids. It's go back to ancient Greece, the youth of today are a problem. So yeah, sure. That isn't new in that sense. But, I think just even as adults and the people working with teenagers, kids nowadays, we have to remind them that they can reach for the stars. And, they didn't fully get to Alpha Centauri, but you hit the moon, so well
Nice.
done. Do you know what I mean? And I was, but I just, it's funny when you say, and I don't say it exactly as I've said to you now, but when I talk to young people about their ambitions or their future, you can see their eyes widen that this stuff certainly hasn't been said to them before.
The thing that I'm kind of taking back from all the things you've said so far is that you mentioned there was no curriculum early on about what you do as such. And that you as yourself, you're having to set your principles yourself, and then you're engaging with people, and then you're being careful not to throw your opinions and stuff necessarily too heavy on them. What I'm trying to get at is that there's no curriculum to what you do. It's just similar to our episodes that we've talked about just being a role model and being a good person. It's kind of like each to their own sort of thing. You haven't got an overarching theme that everyone, it's like at the end of the week, you don't look at a board and go, oh yeah, did I hit my targets of what I need to do necessarily? You're just being yourself. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Completely, yeah. Listen, fellow youth workers would never forgive me if I didn't just add a tiny thing. There is a youth work curriculum in the sense of a document that will explain and unpick things like soft skills, life skills, creativity. There is curriculums out there, but it's not delivered in the way a school would deliver it with, we need to teach you X by this point. So we might do things like first aid courses or workshops, or even forms of accreditation where they can get a peer mentoring. That kind of stuff does exist, and we do that stuff. But it is very much what you're saying, that we are free pretty much to have the conversation around whatever the young people want to discuss. And actually, that's the kind of things we want to talk about. And fostering those conversations is really interesting, because a bunch of youth workers could all deal with something in very different ways, but they all be correct, or they all be a good way of dealing with it. And I think it is about finding your style and your way of delivery. And this is the whole thing about being self-reflective. I know when I scream and shout, people listen, and it scares the living daylights out of them. So I have to be really careful to use that as like the last resort and sparingly, because I see the faces of horror. Like my voice can go particularly loud, so it's knowing kind of your strengths and your weaknesses. So on certain topics, I'm very passionate about them, and it's being aware, like, I don't want to taint their way of thinking, but at the same time, I'm very happy to let them know I might think X, but it's okay to think the opposite to me. Obviously, I'll make my case as well, but I think it's about asking those questions, because I'm more intrigued about what they think, where they're currently at. And then we can have a conversation about, well, did you actually know Zelensky, blah, blah, blah? And did you know Putin, blah, blah, blah? Or,
but that's the power of it.
Opening that wide conversation. It's not about, coming up with a clear cut answer. I'll give you an example. Because there's this thing that we used to call information, advice, and guidance. I had a young person come to me the other day, and he said he's been given a pass mark on his coursework, and he got 41 out of whatever it was. And the school have said to him, we think you should pay for this to get remarked, because if you get one extra mark, you get a merit. So he said, oh, Dave, what do you think I should do? It costs 40 quid. So rather than just say, well, have you got 40 quid to burn? We unpicked it and said, what would be the pros and cons? And then I said, well, what have you decided now that we've unpicked it? Oh, I think I'm going to pay for it. That's what I had in my mind as the advice I was going to give him. But at the same time, it's better that he comes to that conclusion and actually we unpick it, because next time I might not be there. So, it's better off he has a process in mind of going, actually, I just need to weigh things up and think, what's good out of this? What's bad out of this? Because he can't lose that pass mark. So he ain't got much to lose. So, it's things like that I think, it's like the old Oxfam thing about the man, give him a fish or teach him to fish.
I was literally just about to say, give a person a Dave, you'll answer the question. Give Dave's mentality, you'll answer every question for the rest of your life. I was literally it was on the tip of my tongue.
So I want to just move it on a little bit now, and let's talk about it from an industry point of view. You hear about a lot of governmental kind of budget cuts, be that, say, for example, police, NHS, youth work. I want to just explore that a little bit. Like, how can that be problematic for youth work, and maybe does it tie youth workers' hands? Does it tie workers from being able to have the organic conversations that you speak over the experiences? And if so, Why?
Short answer, yes. And why is simply because often, like we're having through this conversation, people don't realize what the youth work is. So when they think, oh, we can cut that, when people were saving a lot of money, especially back in the 2008 crash, it's seen as an extra service that doesn't need to exist. Little do they know that we were helping out little Molly with whatever was going on with her life. So, they think they've shut down the pool and table tennis club, and actually it's more than that. It's seen as an easy cut, and youth work has had a huge cut to it over the last decade. Even the fact that you can't study it in many universities nowadays because the way the university funding formula has changed and more or less made students customers, and they shop around a bit now, and the universities have to kind of try and entice them. So there has been a real lack of understanding about what was lost. And there is a number of reports that has recognized what was lost. And I think even people in power finally realize we need to fund good youth work. And I think some of the funders are starting to realize it's more than the table tennis club and so on. There has been some headway. There is some money being put back into it. But the problem is you've lost a generation of youth workers that would have been grown through, so it has a huge dramatic effect. And I think sometimes it's really hard in our industry to always mark and measure, whereas when someone sits a GCSE English exam, it's really easy to measure, did they pass or fail? It's really hard to know, did we pass or fail a kid in the youth centre? And sometimes X kid gets loads of support and the other kid doesn't, because we can't always spread ourselves everywhere. So it's really difficult, I think, to benchmark and measure it and say it's 300 litres of good youth work when we spend a lot of time doing that anyway now. We have to, sing for our supper, as another colleague might say, and constantly explain what we do. The amount of teachers that I run into that have said to me, I'll never forget it, about 3 years ago, one teacher, she said, what do you actually do at the youth centre? And I said, and I could see from the snarky way she said it, she didn't really ask me the question. I just said informal education. And she said, what's that? I thought, which was interesting from a formal educator. But yeah, so I think, part of it, but that is also our burden to bear in youth work. We have to explain and scream from the rooftops. And hopefully some of the young people that come through the youth centres and youth projects are also able to articulate the experiences for them, and hopefully they become part of the decision makers and realise why we need to fund youth work properly.
I mean, it's really, it's a good answer. And it's interesting that you still at this stage have to kind of explain yourself even to people in fellow sister industries. You may not be in the same strand, but you're working together for the same sort of thing. I mean, the question I was going to ask you on that note is, for the last 2 episodes, we were exploring youth crime in the community. And although, for example, you don't blame young people for all the crime, there is obviously genuine concerns around youth crime. Do you see a link between the challenges of youth budget cuts and maybe youth crime or young people and well-being, mental health? Do you see a link there?
From the reports and research I've read, yes, undoubtedly. Whether you see a decline in X service always ends up with an increase somewhere else. Do I think if we fully funded state-of-the-art youth services up and down the country, this youth violence epidemic would end? No. England seems to sometimes follow America in lots of senses. And thank God we don't have the proliferation of guns. But if we did, we would have this kind of problem. So I think part of it is, again, you mentioned role models earlier on. It's having all sorts of things in your life that make you go, no, my life is valuable. It's not worth me carrying a knife in my pocket for maybe protection that then ends up getting used in a scenario where nothing was thought out. It was a heat of the moment thing. And, bam, someone's now dead. And we forget that tragically, when a young person loses their life, the repercussions that has for their family around them, for that immediate friendship group, and for the young people that we never hear about that are injured for life. They have horrific injuries. Yes. I know a lot of different kids, and they don't make it to the news story because they're still alive. And there are lots of reasons. Look at the stuff with the police lately, and sadly we have that horrific case of Child Q in Hackney. And you just think to yourself, like, where is the trust in authority? And if the authorities want some level of trust, they need to fix up badly, because it's very hard as someone working inside of the system to say you should trust authority around you when there's very few examples of showing why they should trust authority. It makes all of our jobs harder.
Do you feel media plays a role in exacerbating some of the challenges that we may have with young people, adults with young people, adults versus young people?
I think that's it, innit? Because at what point do we change? When does that light switch flick? In terms of young people to adult. And I think we all play a part. Maybe there is a disconnect between what we would use to establish as community and the fact that people knew their neighbours, and actually if there was an issue, Johnny's mum was going to whack you around the back of the ear roll or whatever. So maybe there is a loss of that sense of community about knowing our neighbours. We're all in London, so we're talking about 10 million people, but there has to be ways as adults in the community, as the people that should be responsible for fostering the younger generations, that we take responsibility and actually do something a bit differently. Because I don't think, it's very easy to blame them. A lot of people like to blame the music culture or the associations around that. That's not born out of nothing. That's born out of people in the situations where they're at and how they see it. That's what the music is reflecting, not the music is creating that situation. And what is it they're searching for? Sense of belonging. If you're coming from a family, and it can happen in all sorts of scenarios, but stereotypically, if you're coming from a family where you've never been given much love, there's not much in terms of money in the household, you're going hungry, and someone at the age of 13 offers you an opportunity to put a couple of £100 in your pocket each week for doing some dodgy dealings, you might take them up on that offer.
No brainer.
Yeah, so and we wonder why. And then we say to the 13, 14-year-old, okay, we'll give you an apprenticeship when you're 17 and a half. They're not waiting till they're 17 and a half. So it's all of those things that we have to do better, and the system has to move faster. I don't know if it's worth mentioning something called county lines. So this is kids and teenagers going from London and various other bigger cities to little towns and selling various drugs. Now, what's happening is, whereas before that was kids that would be on the periphery of education or excluded from schools or not in education at all, they're now working out, do this with some A-star kids because it takes longer for the radar to catch them. Surely, as the people in power, social services, police, youth services, all the rest of it, we should be able to act faster than the criminal underworld because we've got more resource on our side. But we don't seem to be as nimble as them. And everything takes a lot longer. So maybe it's about our response could really help deal with the issue of youth crime. And at the end of the day, these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds losing their lives over very little. And it's that trauma. We forget there is also the killer, which is usually another teenager sitting in jail for the next 20 years. And what happens to them when they come out? I think it's about a holistic approach. And if you look at some of the success that people point to in Glasgow, in Scotland, one of the things that they did in terms of looking at in a public health way, and what does that really mean? Well, they confronted people. What they did was bring a lot of the young people in front of them and some of the groomers and say, look, we know this. Here's the evidence. If you don't do something and get involved with this apprenticeship or this job opportunity we've got for you or whatever, we're coming for you. They told them to their face. They had an honest conversation. Look at the huge decrease in youth violence in Scotland. And again, when I talk to some young people and I say, be careful, because you guys need to think carefully. You live in a highly surveilled world now. I hear the phrase that I've always heard in youth work, they won't catch me.
Wow.
Sadly, that's not true.
Which is funny because that's why, going off subject just a slight bit, I don't know if you've seen Top Boy, but I don't watch TV very much, but I decided to binge watch the two Netflix releases while I was away on some other work. And I thought it was really interesting because actually what it did in this program is every character was having hardship. Nobody was living as successful. There was no smooth story for anybody. So, often you have your heroes, your goodies in focus, but everybody, it touched on the human side of them, the fact that for a lot of them, they were struggling with their identity because they had this caring human side and then this other criminal side. And in many cases, some of the characters that were main features were getting killed. So what it was telling the story is that actually, even though, you might forge a relationship with this person, you think, oh man, okay, this person, they're getting taken out.
What's this, Game of Thrones? No one's safe, basically. One episode,
this kind of thing. Obviously it follows, Top Boy follows particular characters, which I guess will always be, well, actually, I can say I guess they will be. They may not be, but I think it ties into this idea of this world. I mean, you talk about county lines, all of this sort of thing, entering into it, there's nothing pretty about it. But what David, you're highlighting is about there's certain needs that people are looking for, and if it's not met in these mainstream spaces, in these safe spaces, people will go to unsafe spaces to get those needs met. Well, I've got a question, and we're going to try to tackle this in 10 minutes. We're going to try to, even less if we can. I was saying to Ivan at a certain point that I noticed there was a time where in the youth work industry, especially in Newham, where Newham is where I was working, there'd be a lot of black youth workers, a lot of black workers who would be things like teaching assistants. Maybe not as much Asians, although I think that might have changed as well since the time that I've left, but not necessarily at the top. And the reason why I'm saying that is to say that sometimes the impression that I've got is that when you're talking about issues that involve people of ground, especially somewhere as multicultural as Newham, the very people that has the power to make the decisions doesn't necessarily reflect the people that they're talking about. I know I went to a discussion around youth and knife crime in 2020, just before the pandemic kicked in, and it was at the Houses of Parliament. And crazy, all sorts of people, but the people that were on the panel mostly were of a particular demographic, with particular academic achievements, and statistically would have a lot of information and insight. But in terms of at a ground roots level of just how it operates on the day-to-day, how you recognize these characters, how you know the codes, they weren't part of that. So I guess the question I'm now putting to you is, do you think there is a representation within the industry for workers or people that actually understand what's going on at a ground roots level? And has that now reflected in management, or is there still work to be done?
So, internally, it's hard to answer that one. But your main point is about, do the decision makers reflect the diversity of the people they're trying to make decisions about? I think nationally, if you look at the picture of what youth work is now, the structures that once existed have more or less diminished. And who is championing youth work and at what level within central government or wherever? But I think thus ever was. Decision makers do not look at the Houses of Parliament. That certainly does not reflect the diverse and ethnic makeup of the United Kingdom. And the danger with not having a diverse thought pool of opinion is you end up in groupthink, all thinking the same thing anyway. But surely, if you're giving tons of money to something, you want to go and see what your money's getting. Yeah. So it's not difficult. And always, when anyone ever visits any kind of youth setting that I've ever run, their eyes always widen, they're always amazed, and they tell you they're doing a wonderful job because they're shocked that you're not a pool and table tennis coach and actually you're doing more. And they recognize that you're using young people's names and you're half dealing with a little fight that just happened over there. And this one's asking you about their homework, and they can see it. You can't hide it when you walk in a kind of youth setting like that. So I think sometimes, but maybe that's talking about the social mobility of our, society, that it isn't. Social mobility has declined in the United Kingdom. You do not often find the story of little Johnny in an impoverished community ending up as the chief exec of X organization.
For sure.
And it goes back to that lack of ambition stuff we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
But for sure, after George Floyd, and, there's so many, like you said earlier, there's lots of different ways you can take this. I came to race late. I grew up, racism late, rather. I grew up in a very diverse, completely mixed primary, secondary school experience, right? So when I'm a young adult and I'm outside of London and I'm hearing other things from other people, I'm like, oh, racism seems to be a thing elsewhere. forgetting and not unpicking structural racism and all sorts of other signs that I might not have missed as a white man. So it's very interesting after George Floyd to really have those conversations again and look at what representation, diversity, and equality actually mean. And my favorite word to include in this is also equity, because it's no good just giving everybody the same stage to stand on when actually someone's 4 foot shorter. They need a 4 foot box to stand on. So it's very much the conversation about how we do that. And it's what we've been saying throughout is about asking those questions. I don't think there are clear-cut answers for every scenario, but It's definitely asking the question, about what are we trying to attempt to achieve here? Because we've all got preconceived ideas. It's how human beings operate, but you need to check those ideas, and check they're valid and real.
Yeah, we had a guest on another podcast we have, and they call it backpack of beliefs that you carry around with you. You got to unpack it.
Yes, it's true. And I guess, Ivan, that kicks into the whole idea of how you're questioning things. You're getting young people to question, but essentially you've got to question yourself, don't you? You've got to almost be the example that you're hoping for the young people to be. We are work in progress, and like you said, for yourself as a white male in the industry, where you're no doubt going to be working with a whole range of young people, you are work in progress. As a black male, I am work in progress, and so it's about being comfortable to be on that journey while we're encouraging other people to be on that journey as well. Wow, I feel like we've jumped a lot, and I feel like this could have been incredibly we could have gone into so much deeper with a lot of the things that you've said. From my perspective, I think I'd like to ask you to leave on a closing thought. And maybe for you, if somebody wanted to get into youth work and they asked you, why should I get into youth work? What might you say to them?
It will be one of the most fun jobs you've ever had, simply because you don't know what's next. You don't know what's going to walk through that door. And when some young people do walk through that door, sit and have a conversation, you can brew the most maddest of plans and then laugh about it 6 months later because they're now in action. And I think it's the beauty of seeing wonder in those eyes. They do it on the teaching adverts for the teaching courses and stuff. Like, do you want to, enthuse young eyes? It's very much the same. But guess what? You've not got to worry about their GCSE English. You're more caring about that individual. And I think that's at the core of it. If you like people, if you like teenagers, if you want to have a conversation and foster those good relationships with them and be a person they can chat to about anything and everything, then give it a go. What's there to lose?
Yeah, 110%. Wow. I don't know, Ivan, is there anything closing remarks that you want to just say, just in reflection and kind of what we've spoken about?
I just want to say, basically, I'm just so proud to find to know that there's someone like David in the community that kids can go to, that can be used as a type of like a role model. Basically, we've been saying for ages, Alex, we have a literal role model on the show, that kids can go away and, like we joked about before, having a net. They see David for a moment and they go away and they've got a little bit of David in them that they can pass 100%. On. So yeah, I just think it's awesome. There's people like you, and I felt really inspired. So yeah, thank you so much.
100%. And for myself, yeah, it's really taken me back to my youth work days. I left youth work in 2005. So that's it's a good while back that I left the industry. And yes, I still do work with young people in different capacities, but just not like this. I think and from my perspective, seeing you as a young person, in your mid-teens at the time when I'd gotten to know you, to see what you've developed into and how fluently you speak about things, it's incredibly inspiring for me to hear and observe. And I really hope that people listening will get something out of this as well. Even if, people are doing their own thing, but just you're more mindful of the importance of, I think everyone should be aware of the power of youth work in the same way that everyone needs to be aware of the importance of a shopkeeper. It doesn't mean you want to become an owner of a shop, but you understand that you can't get your food pieces without these people.
You're integral.
And the same as, the same as youth work, these people are needed, they may be influencing your kids. Do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, those are my final thoughts. But I just want to say thank you so much, and I hope you've enjoyed the time here with us, the hour and 15 minutes, I think, that we spent. Maybe less.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And anybody, if you wish if you're watching this and you really feel like you wanted to share any comments, feel free to put any comments underneath the clips that you may see. And
Put them in the comments.
In the comments below. And importantly, if you really were impacted by anything that David had to say, you can definitely reach him on his Instagram handle, as it is labeled right there. Check him out. And if you want to get into it, I'd highly recommend you. Youth work, it's kept me looking young, Thursday.
All right, until next time, everyone.
We
See you
out.
around.
Peace.
Bye.